And I apologize for not saying that at the start. So, so part of the reason for this kind of slowdown and re-looking at the Spark revision is that we actually at the division have a really big vision for Spark and what it can do for our early learning system and providers, and that we know that Spark is really the supportive framework for continuous quality improvement. And we've talked a lot about that in this committee, that that's really what we want Spark to be considered is really that a part of that continuous quality improvement. And that part of that CQI, as we affectionately call it, is that it really links programs to resources and builds a supply of quality across the state. We know that we are an under-resourced system, that we don't have the resources that we need, and that's part of what we really need to be working towards, to adequately resource so that providers really can provide the high quality care that we know that the vast majority of them want to provide. So we really are looking at slowing down the Spark revisions to really ensure that we're aligned with ELD's, our broader vision, and really moving a system of quality early care and education. A lot of that is really, we've got to help address the challenges with the lack of supply in our states, particularly a lack of quality supply. We know that we don't have nearly enough programs that serve children and families, and that the programs that we have just really aren't resourced to engage in continuous quality improvement cycles. They do the best they can with what they have. We know our R&R system is under-resourced. I mean, every part of early learning is under-resourced. And so, you know, we need to really think about how do we get the resources in to really help support them in that continuous quality improvement. We see Spark really provides those supports to the providers to participate, to really serve the children in programs like preschool, Baby Promise, and, you know, really how do we ramp up how we are able to support more providers. And what we know is that really takes more resources. And so really want to create a system that we're able to continue to look for resources and scale up as we go, so that we're really lifting all boats to higher quality and supporting them appropriately. Part of this vision is really reaching out and supporting the providers, particularly those that serve our priority populations in that continuous quality improvement, and really move forward in terms of looking at our equity lens and how that really supports where the children are that are really needing the supports, and prioritizing that. This is work that we've continued to do, but we know that there needs to be resources and really targeted help around this. We have a vision that there will be more state resources directed towards Spark. The current resources, as we all know, and as I've mentioned prior, I think I keep mentioning it because it's that we know this, they don't even come close to allowing us to truly provide the supports and resources to help providers reach the standards. They operate, you know, we're operating in an under-resourced system, and in order to really advance our equity goals, we have to be committed to resourcing it. And if, you know, and the reality is if we don't get the resources we need, we really are going to have to ask ourselves some hard questions about the best use of the resources that we do have to support providers. But I never live in that list. I live in the when we get the resources, because I believe in positive. We've sent out the positive vibes out there. And I do think that, you know, there's been a lot of momentum and a lot of support about new investments in early care and education. I mean, the governor has formed a children's cabinet in which that also have 4 subcommittee groups that we're all working on at the division with other stakeholders and legislators in terms of how do we really get some investment and what really do we need to be focusing on. There's an early childhood committee that's really working within the legislature, as well as the Early Learning Council strategic planning, and all of this is focused on early learning, about the lack of supply, professional learning support, and we've heard directly that these are really the priorities that are coming out of the governor's office. And I think, you know, as all of you know, we've been doing a lot of work on our licensing regulations. And, you know, we always know there wasn't enough resources, but it really brought it forward that as we're going to have, you know, additional safety standards in place, we need to really be able to support them and with their lack of resources. So we want to position Spark really as that essential need to support providers and the investments that we need to prioritize it. I want to talk a little bit about a policy option package that, again, is part of this big vision, and that we're working, that really does bring forward a significant investment, and it's, you know, really looking at how do we increase the capacity in the child care resource and referral system to really provide that intensive TA, which in sense means more quality improvement specialists. What are the incentives that we can provide to providers and financial support? And how do we really look to build our capacity for data collection so that we can move forward with a portfolio process that is less work for providers, and really looking at training a cadre of data collectors using the environmental rating scales, all the variety of tools from the infant toddler to the preschool, school age, and family child care tool, to be used as one of the tools for providing intensive coaching and technical assistance, as well as having that be really on-site observation to be a part of what is put into the portfolio as evidence of meeting standards that are within the standards framework that we've all worked to create together. So that's kind of the big picture vision. I know that we probably have a lot of questions, so I kind of want to ask, kind of pause and ask for any questions. And I know that, you know, I also want to give Sarah an opportunity to add any details that I may have missed, as she's been really integral in working on the legislation and the policy option packages around the preschool expansion work and the workforce. So we've been working really closely at what those policy areas need to be and how do we, kind of the budget work that we've been doing in terms of how to resource this. So Sarah, is there anything you want to add before we kind of pause for questions?
Sure, Dawn. Thanks. Just really quickly, I think I would, I think you hit all the points. I would just add, our vision includes, I mean, I think bringing this system together. So from licensing, sort of the two bookends, licensing up to sort of like a state-funded preschool or similar expectations for infants and toddlers. And I think we recognize under a new director with a new vision and some, you know, attention, as Dawn mentioned, from the governor to this issue and pulling together a children's cabinet, that we have the opportunity to ask for the resources, as Dawn said, but also to expand, I think, both ends of that system. So to support more providers and becoming licensed, we know that we need a bigger supply across the state. And also we know that we need to support programs in their readiness to implement a program such as Head Start or OPK, Preschool Promise, and others. And so this system has really, you know, we've taken your recommendations and looked really at aligning what are the right supports to get programs there. And as Dawn mentioned, we know that that's not just sort of like a small or a light touch, that we need to resource this robustly in order to get programs there. But I'll stop there because I would also be interested in hearing what questions folks have.
So the questions from the committee?
Yeah, any questions?
One thing
Hi, Susan.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear how school age will be considered in all of this. I'm hearing P5, I'm hearing preschool, I'm hearing early learning specialists and policy advisors on the call. And you know, school agers are a huge population of kids that get supports through subsidy, and that's where all this is funded. And I just want to be that squeaky wheel that says, hey, school leaders are out there. They're having safety issues too. They deserve to be a part of that investment in quality. And so as things move forward, I just would like to ask that school age is at the table as things move forward. Not really a question, but just a reminder.
No, and thank you for that, Susan. Actually, you know, in having these conversations of thinking about how do we have a fully resourced Spark system, and what is that role? I mean, you know, when we think about the education of children, right? We have a really robust K-12 education system. We don't have a P5 education system. And then what is that, the care and education? How do we think about that in terms of the before and after school care? And so we are convening a team internally at the beginning to really think through how does school age fit within these other policies, so that we can know how to resource it. I think one of the opportunities that we have is that we really do see Spark as being very nimble in terms of supporting different pedagogies, supporting, you know, different ways of thinking, of not being locked into what continuous quality improvement looks like, or even potentially what tool is being used in that arena. So I think we've got some good opportunities to think outside of different tools and think about what is out there and what would work best, so that it's not, I keep talking about our Spark as that, how I see it is that it's much more nimble, much more iterative. Like we're not stuck with something until revisions, that we're really able to respond as we roll things out to when there's issues. You know, I think we all know within the race to the top, we had some real constraints in terms of a validation study and not being able to make certain changes. And I think moving forward, that's not a constraint, so that we are able hopefully to respond and make adjustments more quickly in response to the field and what we learn along the way. So, but with that, we definitely know that we need to know what is our policy in terms of school age, and how is that going to be supported and in what venues. So a doodle poll went out today to start having that conversation. So thank you for that, Susan.
That's great. I'm going to push on you just a little bit more. Just kind of understanding the inner workings of the early learning division. I'm not aware of anyone within that internal role, or, you know, internal machinations who have a school age specialty. And so I have a little bit of concern about a group at the early learning division talking about school age without school age at the table. So however I can help, I'm happy to help.
Thank you for that. And I want to assure you, this is a first of a conversation internally about how to approach it. And I am happy to share who was invited. That I actually do see, I mean, not the level of that you have, Susan, but it's going to be Kelly Walker, Meredith Russell, Henry Oliva, myself, Miriam. So, I mean, I think the people that have been dealing in the school age and have heard a lot of the feedback will be there to figure out what is our path forward.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I feel better.
Okay, good. Other questions?
Hi, Dawn. This is Eva. I'm not sure. Well, I guess I have one question and then I have a couple comments. So my first question is just around the term P5 and thinking about how we've heard P3, and does P3 mean preschool to third grade, or does it mean prenatal to third grade? And so I see the term P5 and I go, so is that prenatal to fifth grade, or is it preschool to fifth grade, or is that prenatal to 5 years old? So what does that refer to?
Prenatal to 5 years old.
Okay. Thanks.
So, yeah.
I appreciate that context for me. I think my comments are really around the hold on Spark. With my CCR and R hat on, and we're looking at focused childcare networks and building focused childcare networks, we've really struggled with getting people engaged in Spark, knowing that there's a new Spark revision rolling out and nobody knows what's happening with that. We're measured for our focused childcare network on how many new programs become Spark rated, and with people hesitating to engage in the old system because there's a new system coming, I think it might be wise to create the bridge that needs to happen, even though we don't know where the end of that bridge is, to give CCR and Rs a way to engage providers in that increasing quality process, because we are really struggling with getting people engaged when they know something new is coming, but they don't know what it is. They don't want to commit to something that they don't know what it is. I would hate to see more momentum lost because we're putting this off again until next summer. And providers have heard for the last year, you need to hurry up and get your portfolio in. They're going to stop taking it. There's not the capacity to deal in the old system and the new system. So I think there needs to be some message there and some support there to help continue to engage providers in that work. So that's my first comment. My second comment is around the work with health and safety and really wanting to be sure that we're mindful of safety. And Susan brought it up, safety in school age programs. The recent change in rules for school districts not having to be licensed is a giant concern for me for Preschool Promise. We've got preschool programs in school districts. I think there's probably really good reasons why that happened. And I guess in my mind, I'm thinking about double background checks and some of those things that maybe that change alleviated. But as a Preschool Promise manager, when I go out and do monitoring for those programs, I'm not checking health and safety. I'm not looking at how many kids there are to adults. I'm not asking, does the 3-year-old walk down the hallway to go to the bathroom by themselves? And those are basic health and safety things that I think we've now left those programs open to without monitoring. So those are my two comments.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so first I want to thank you for the bridge and the CCR and R, and I absolutely hear you and know we need to, one, you won't be held to monitored on Spark ratings at this point, right? So, but I think, what the messaging we need to get out there to help is that, this is a system about continuous quality improvement, and how do we work on your professional development within that. So I think we need to have that discussion and to have that out. I think in regards to the school districts, just to speak about, is that one, we aren't looking at them not having to do certain things. We are creating an alternative pathway, and this was a legal decision, not a decision outside of, is like in terms of our statutory authority, the way our statute is written, that they are legally exempt from licensing, and that we actually are not able to license them, even if they volunteered. So with that, we are creating an alternative pathway about those core health and safety situations that we care about. And I think you hit on many of them in your comments. And so that is work that's going on that we're looking to have done by the end of the summer. And that would be a part of Preschool Promise and part of the contractual expectation as we move forward. We were also wanting to work really closely with school districts. We don't want different preschool systems set up, and so they do have, they shouldn't have to duplicate fire marshal and sanitation and those things that are already done. So how can we kind of better align that health and safety requirements, but what are those that are specific for early childhood that are different than third graders, second graders, first graders, kindergartners? Which kindergartners, I still think a lot of that's some good safety stuff, but yeah, so how do we better align and connect? So I definitely appreciate that, and we don't want those critical foundational health and safety lost either.
I appreciate that. I think I think some of what I struggle with, I do get that there are good reasons for doing that. I think the big concern forefront in my mind is that I'm contracting with my Preschool Promise programs for next year now, and knowing how often things take a little while and the wheels turn slowly, it makes me a little fearful for this coming year where there won't be licensing in the building, and knowing that there's a plan in place as kids come into school the beginning of September, and realizing that that's a few short weeks away. It's not a long process away. It's coming very quickly. So I would just, stick that back out there again, is just, I worry about our students, and I would agree. The things that we do for 3-year-olds often I think are needed for 5-year-olds and maybe 6-year-olds. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Right. And I think I saw a question in the chat box from Susan about other schools. And so this would be limited, and we actually will have an FAQ coming out about alternative pathways, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions around that, as that's new information. So I don't want to get too deep into it on this Spark conversation. But what I can say is that, it is, if they're contracting with someone else, that can be licensed. It's when the license is specifically with the school in which that we are not that we don't have licensing authority. And so if it's a YMCA contracting, the school's contracting with a YMCA and the YMCA holds the license, we will continue to license those. And I know that there's been some questions out there about other government entities, and our statute is, it doesn't exclude others. We have some work to do, but that we are only right at this point needing to stop doing licensure for school districts. And so there'll be ongoing conversations with other government entities such as community colleges, universities, other, if there's any city-run parks and recs that are that, way, we need to have additional conversations and do some work, because the statute is not clear. We've done a lot of work on that, and so that it's really up where we're at. So any other Spark questions? Again, we have more information coming out on alternative pathways.
Not a question, just Danelda, but throughout our work, we've talked about alignment of systems, that's one of the things that we see Spark helping us, and that we need to do that comprehensive. So it seems as though this new wrinkle about licensure of school districts allows us to go right into alignment issues, because whatever we work out with the district's issue, then we can see how that applies to other entities as well. So it's kind of forcing us into some of our things that we've identified that need to be done. I think the very first meeting that we had, we were talking about working towards better alignment with multiple stakeholders. Little did we know it was going to be dropped in our lap. So, any other questions? What I also heard, Dawn, you say is essentially what we're going to do is back up a little bit to say, and which I think as a provider I appreciate, if we don't have resources, we aren't going to ask for certain things to be done. And so we need to back up and see what we can do as we move towards providing more resources. Because many times we get into places where we have to implement and we don't have the resources and it doesn't work. So that it's good to know that we're realizing that those two have to go hand in hand. So, any more discussion? Good comment. So,
could I add a little bit more around the resourcing if there's no other comments? I just felt like I was talking a whole bunch and wanted to pause a little bit before we move on to the next agenda item.
Certainly, resourcing is a key factor here, I think.
Well, and I think so much of it is, is what we've actually, this committee has helped us get to this point. Part of the revision process that is definitely is still there in terms of how do we, when we look at that resourcing, is that we do know that we needed to streamline the portfolio process, and that was key work that has been done, and we're looking at how do we do more streamlining. Knowing that we need to really provide the resources for the providers to reach the standards that we have set, and that experience and language, I think that's been a huge work that this committee and others and we heard in throughout Spark in really how do we set the standard and see that as an asset.
Yes.
And that really expanding the focus beyond those that are already licensed. As we know, as we think about building supply, when you become licensed, yes, there's more oversight, but you're also able to care for more children, which is a really strong supply building strategy. Now, that's not for all, and there's a space for all types of care, most definitely, but that is a strong supply building, and we want all providers to be able to have access to continuous quality improvement. And again, I mentioned this before, and I just feel like I can't not mention it again, is the personnel qualifications, and where there's a lack of professional development, particularly a lack of trainings in multiple language. I mean, you all who work directly in the field know that we need to increase that and get more resources out there. And so I think the professional development component within the continuous quality improvement is really that first, is what we really can focus our next time on, even prior to any revisions coming out, is like, it's that professional development. And I think that's part of the languaging, like you mentioned, Eva, that we need to get out there about what are the best practices. We have these standards, we can be training to that before there's other, the formal rating process is necessarily there, because it really is in that spirit about continuous quality improvement.
And that's one of the things that this committee has emphasized over and over. It's about the quality. It's not about the number or the rating.
Yep.
Dawn, this is Susan again. So I'm a firm believer in the system, and I want everyone to feel like they fit and be a part of it and succeed in the system. And I want to be a champion and an ambassador out in the world. But if the message we're hearing is we're under-resourced, so we're pulling back, I can hear people saying to me, well, what about all the resources they used on the revision? And how do I respond? Where did those resources go? I'm hearing a little bit, the portfolio will be streamlined, and that work is not lost, and that a lot of input was gained and things like that. But can you help me respond to those kinds of questions that I?
Yeah, I mean, I think they haven't been wasted resources from my perspective at all. We've been doing the work of this revision, and that's all that work is still a part of the revision process. We're just needing more time to really look at it from looking at additional resources that we can get in, and further streamlining, further looking at what are the supports we can provide. So, I mean, I think a strong example of it is the further streamlining the portfolio. We're looking at continuing to use the personnel qualifications. So it's a slowdown in terms of continuing to work on those components that we've already been working on to even do more. Sarah, do you have anything, or Alyssa, Meredith?
This is Sarah. I was just going to jump in. I don't know if it's worth mentioning. I think as we sort of move through this meeting and we talk more about how folks can continue to be involved, this will come up, so I don't mean to jump the gun, but we have been sort of talking about what communication support do we need, recognizing certainly that none of us are, at least at ELD, I won't speak for ad hoc members, are communications experts in that way. and that we know we need to be able to supply you all, folks that have been involved in this process, CCR&Rs, quality improvement specialists, focused childcare network folks, in the field with messages that are helpful in understanding sort of where we're going in a way that is, explanatory, transparent, sort of digestible by everyone, but also doesn't leave you in a spot where you feel like you're sort of having to play a game of telephone or communicate something you're not sure about. So we're working on that now in hopes of a pretty quick turnaround, sort of with some immediate support to everyone. And I think would be looking for this group's input and reaching out to folks who have been involved in, did we miss anything? Are these the right messages, et cetera? So I just wanted to throw that in there.
I appreciate that, Sarah. I think that communication and being able to put a clear message out there for people is really important. And I think what Dawn just said about personnel qualifications being the space where they start to work on quality improvement, I think is really important, because I think that we've really looked at Spark and quality improvement as not just personnel qualifications, but what the program looks like and the stuff in the program and the actual supports for the kids in the program. And I think sometimes the personnel piece seems a little bit harder, seems a little bit of a longer road, and so it gets pushed backwards. And if we can bring that to the forefront for people and have that be the focus, I think that changes things a little bit. I'm really speaking from a rural standpoint where it's hard for us to get classes, and sometimes buying stuff for the classroom or for the program is easier than looking at the personnel qualifications. And personnel qualifications certainly take more time. And if the message that's put out there can be, you're still working on increasing quality, and this is the space where we think should be your primary focus, I think that would be very helpful to our CCR&Rs and getting people into training and to really looking at those parts.
Great, that's super helpful. So it sounds like a strand that we need to be aware of is not just sort of like what's happening, but how can you prepare for this change? At least as much as we can sort of say at this juncture. Sounds important.
Mm-hmm.
This is Danelda. I think part of that communication too, we go back to Eva's comments about how do we prepare people to not get disinterested, or what's the other word? We want them to continue to, yeah, whatever. We want to keep the momentum going, and they have so many challenges as it is. We don't want them to feel discouraged about this.
Right.
Well, we also did talk, maybe that's the next, when we go into the next one, the next agenda item, about what we've done, how far we've come. And then in that discussion, I also think we had talked prior to this new advent about the need for more resources, but we had talked about slowing down and phasing in. So we can talk about that a little bit, maybe as we look at what we've done on our contributions as the ad hoc committee.
Yeah, and I think, Donald, unless there's any other questions, I think
go to that.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's Dawn and myself, sounds like, from our agenda.
And whoever wants to join in, Meredith, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, I think that this committee did some really good work and articulated some things that will really make the system more inviting to providers and also more inclusive of what we've been hearing from the community. The committee also really stressed the family voice and also continuing that linking back to the community, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that emphasis as we go forward. Throughout the work too, we talked about professional development as part of the quality, and that we needed to work on the pathway and the journey, not on the rating. That maybe we somehow look at not having so much emphasis on your number or your star, but on what that means for your professional growth and development and our journey towards the quality. The big thing that I think the committee came up with was recognizing the skills of people in the community, maybe it be cultural, language, and giving credit for that versus just academic requirements. And that Spark was a ladder, not just, you have to come at a certain point and go from there. That any work on quality is to be acknowledged and support given to that, and it's like a scaffolding system that we continue to build. Even those that are higher on the rating system continue to build their professional development and their skills. Those are some of the key takeaways that I saw that this group has really stressed, as well as that whole continuum from pregnancy to school age. That was a concept that I think was carried through even in looking at all the work that we did on the standards. Are there other key takeaways that I've overlooked?
I think, Donalda, the only one that I would add is I guess two, is I feel like this committee really has stressed for the prenatal, but all types of care as well, is building a system that supports all providers, whether you're exempt from licensing or licensed. Like how do we create those supports needed in really focusing where the children are? I think the other one is all the thoughtful work that we used in all of our conversations around the guiding principles and really holding those quality guiding principles and SPARK goals at the forefront and helping just to do that thinking on all the policy topics that we brought forward.
Right. I thought of that last week, but I forgot it this week.
And that goes, this is Meredith, that goes to a comment that Kristen just made in the chat box. I think we did a good job using inclusive language, emphasizing equity. I would certainly say that.
And all of those things we want to go forward, even if we're at a slower pace.
Yeah. And this is Meredith. One thing I would add, and just doing some recent discussions, is the piece that we heard from you folks about the importance of programs being able to highlight and demonstrate their strengths and their uniquenesses, and really taking an asset-based approach, which is to some degree is what we have an opportunity going towards more of a point system, a little bit of a hybrid, but really much more towards points than the building blocks. But I just really have that resonating in my head, and all the discussions we've been having about making sure that we continue to build that in, both in the quality improvement process and making sure that programs are able to focus on what's really important to them and their philosophy and their values and what they see is important to their communities to improve, as well as the rating process and making sure that we're being asset-based and seeing what it is that they're offering and not what's missing.
Yes. The valuing of what people have, what they bring to the table.
Anybody else want to just kind of ahas or areas where you felt that this team has really contributed? All right. Well, Donalda, are we ready then to maybe move to the role of this committee moving forward?
Yes. Well, and I think that if I'm hearing correctly, what we've identified is, well, as you know, let me back up. Several times when we've come to the table to talk about what our work is from the ad hoc committee, we have also acknowledged that there is an implementation committee, and there was another, and then there's the staff committee also that works on these things. So at this point in time, what I'm hearing is that this committee doesn't really have an ongoing role. But that any of us who would want to participate in the implementation committee, that would be an avenue for the continuing engagement and involvement in the Spark process.
Yeah, exactly, Donalda. I mean, the people on this committee have been, you guys have been in the weeds with Spark throughout it, and so know the ins and outs, and really thinking about what the role of the implementation team and what this committee could bring forward to it for people who participated from kind of that policy direction. We would definitely want to invite anyone who is interested in participating to join the implementation team. I might ask Meredith if she would kind of talk about when they meet and kind of what the charge of the implementation team and what they do.
Sure, this is Meredith, and we created the implementation team back at the very beginning of when we were developing the QRIS and doing the regional field test. So it's been since 2013, I would say, and it's a cross-sector group of folks in early learning, everything from licensing specialists to CCR&Rs to providers to hub folks to folks from the Research Institute, folks from Oregon, AUIC, et cetera, to come together and really be looking at all components of the QRIS from an implementation lens. So if these are the policies or procedures that we're developing, how is that going to work on the ground? What do we need to be thinking about? How do we communicate it? How is it going to resonate with the folks you're working with? How is it going to resonate with the policy makers you're talking with, et cetera? So it's really on the ground. Our format has been, believe it or not, for all those years, is to come together once a month. It's typically been in person and have a 3-hour meeting. And we've tried to stay away from those really being updates, and it's really been rolling up your sleeves and working. I would say, you know, kind of what you folks have experienced in the last few months and just with some of the shifting of time frames and things. In the last couple months of implementation team, we've been experimenting with some more virtual meetings, with shorter meetings. And actually, we just had a meeting, was that just last week? Maybe 2 weeks ago, where we did a shorter, more of an updating kind of a meeting virtually, and then took kind of the temperature of the implementation team to say, hey, you know, we know this is a little bit different. What's the value of us, you know, still continuing to meet, even if sometimes it's virtual or shorter, more updates? And they said, absolutely, it is so valuable for us to have these conversations and to hear what's happening. So I'm really excited to keep going, and I would welcome any of you with your expertise and passion that want to participate on that. Just shoot me an email, and we'll be happy to loop you in.
And one of the things I appreciate about this committee is we have the broad diversity specifically. We wanted to be sure that we got school age, that we had CCR&Rs, that we had Head Start, that we had these different areas that are impacted by this, and that people had an opportunity to give input. So I would encourage anybody that could to do that, so that we can continue that broad perspective. The other thing is, I think that this allows for more concentrated focus, because sometimes I thought with our ad hoc meeting, I was trying to figure out what was our role versus the implementation individual's role. So this will kind of combine our activities. Thoughts from the committee? Meredith, was there a set day that the implementation committee meets?
Oh, yes, I was just putting that in the chat box. So we meet the second Thursday of the month. Just put a little note in the chat box about that.
Okay.
9:30 to 12:30.
The other question that I have is, since we're slowing down to speed up, and slowing down so that we can be assured that we have more success when we roll out the new version. In the past, we've talked about, is there any phasing in? And I know that some of the rules had changed, like the 2 years experience before you could get your Spark rating. Are there any other ideas or plans to phase in anything before next summer?
Yeah, this is Dawn. I mean, I probably Meredith might be the better one to talk about it. I'll talk about the two that I know that we've talked about. That is in terms of the administration and business domain, since that is not a part of the new standards. Not that it's not important, but it's not part of the new standards. I think we still know that there's training needs around that and support that's needed. But removing that from the portfolio, as well as looking at how can we incorporate the new personnel qualifications, kind of the methodology that has been developed around that. Is there any others, Meredith, that you can think of?
Those are the two big ones that come to mind. And, you know, I think we're in the discussion of that. I definitely remember our conversations with this committee about the cautions around rolling things out and having little
Yes.
bits and pieces that come out in terms of, you know, that balance of not wanting to confuse the field, but also wanting to say these are things that the research showed us would really be an advantage all around in the big picture, and how do we get those to the field? And some of that also speaks to Eva, what you were saying, and we've been hearing that, you know, as we talk with CCR&Rs, et cetera, you know, what are those nuggets we can give to the field that keep the motivation going? So those are the things that are in process, and I think there's other things that we could think about, and it's just creating that balance.
And I think a lot of it gets into the messaging too, because it's like, well, we're slowing down maybe what people, you know, what we had all thought about and talked about as a big revision, that we talk about we're going to roll out this smaller revision and move forward. But I think that's some work that we need to think through. Was someone trying to say something? I apologize if I jumped in.
That's okay. This is Eva. I was just going to say that I think that those two pieces, knowing that they are going to change, and knowing particularly that the PQ piece is a space where people can continue to work, and it can continue to keep them motivated, and it's not making things more difficult for them to be more highly qualified. Makes sense to me that you roll that out. It, I think, has the potential to keep people engaged, where just saying we're waiting until next year and work on your PQ could have the potential to shut people down more than keep them engaged. And I know that wouldn't be the intention, but you know, people want to continue to work, and we want to have those things in front of them to help them move forward. If it was, and I do think the system, the way we started to talk about it, is more complicated, but it also places more value on the providers and who they are. So I think in some terms it's easier, it's more valuing of them, and I think that they would see that as a positive more than oh, here's one more thing that I have to do.
Right.
That makes sense.
That's good.
I was thinking of the analogy that everybody's preparing for Christmas and then we move Christmas. Yeah.
Don't make it sooner.
Yeah. That's why we have the 12 days of Christmas, so that we can all prepare and have a little bit each time. No, I do having some of the work I've done in the field with our partners, I agree that some of them are working hard on their portfolios, and some of these smaller things would really be helpful to them. So any other comments or thoughts?
Well, this is Meredith, and this is just, I mean, I think maybe it goes without saying, but I feel like I want to say it anyway, is I think some of the benefits that we want to offer to the field with the work that's been done in the revision and some of the streamlining, I think there's also pieces that are really beneficial to children too, and that there are, you know, it's the both and so I remember having this conversation, maybe it's been a year, when we presented to the Equity Implementation Committee, and they really highlighted that for me, you know, that some of these changes, we're making the changes because ultimately we think that this is going to benefit the kids. And so as we go and we think about what are those changes that have been identified that we know are really strong and are going to stay and feel positive, that it's going to benefit the children too. So we want to get it out there as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, some of those will really help the providers too. They may be, you know, like the implications for the new personnel qualifications. I think that's going to be a huge asset once we get that out. So.
But I think to tie those things together, if you can continue to motivate the provider to continue to increase their professional development, you grow the quality, you make things better for the students, right? So it all comes together if we can continue to keep them engaged.
Right. If they lose their teacher that they love because they didn't meet the qualifications, then that's not helping the student. So.
Exactly.
So any other thoughts? Concerns?
This is Kristen, and I thought of a question, and it's just about the resourcing and funding. So is the implementation committee, are they the ones who are working on that? And do you know, like, what are they doing?
This is Meredith. I can answer that. We are not, the implementation team is not a decision-making or a policy or a funding decision-making body. I think it's more like a two-way. We are aware of the resources that we have to work within, but also can share back, here's what's going to be good for the field and good for children and where the resources come. But it's not a decision-making or you know, a formal advisory body in the way that this group was. Does that answer?
Kind of. I mean, what I'm hearing in this meeting is that we don't have enough money. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well, so that's a good, very. Go ahead.
And there are various dimensions that be funded.
Yeah,
okay.
This is Sarah. So I think I can maybe help there, but Dawn, feel free to jump into. So I think we can think about funding from a variety of ways. So one, we have sort of the existing funding that we use through our Child Care Development Block Grant, quality dollars from the Fed. As you probably have heard, those dollars are going to increase. So we will have some more resources just from our CCDF fund for that. But of course, we know, like, you know, standing up this system and offering incentives to providers that actually move them up the ladders of support, as well as sort of dollars for scholarships and other sort of professional learning supports are a lot when you put those together. So certainly our federal dollars are not sort of sufficient to be robust enough to reach all of the programs that we have. So we have you know, you may already know this, so forgive me if I'm telling you something, you know, as an agency, we have this process to ask for funds in the next biennium. So this resourcing Spark, resourcing a more robust professional learning system, I think Dawn outlined before, are two of our big asks for the next session into the governor and into the legislature. And then sort of the other strand there is through this governor's sort of children's cabinet folks coming together and meeting. We're also really elevating that, sure, we could, you know, expand preschool or do something like that, but we'll not be able to do that without a quality improvement process for programs and support to get there. So we're asking, I guess that's to summarize, we're looking at how we can use some of our new resources, how we can use some of our existing resources better, but also recognizing we are making a significant ask through the budget process and then through the next legislative session to have new state investment into the system. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, that's really helpful. This is Kristen again. I guess what was going through my mind is, do we need to do something like they did with Measure 90, where we do some kind of a grassroots thing to the voters, where the voters clearly said, yes, we need to help education in terms of CTE education and decreasing dropout rate and increasing college credit opportunities for kids in high school. And that Measure 98 was resoundingly passed by the voters. And I just can't imagine, like, if we put something in front of the voters that said we need to improve the quality of childcare for P5, that it wouldn't pass. So I just was wondering, yeah, you answered my question, but my mind was going, do we need to somehow increase the dollar amount and figure out a way to do that? So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I also think that and Dawn and Meredith, you can correct me, but the governor's cabinet, I mean, now we have a direct line to the governor and the governor's budget, and their planning. That doesn't mean that it's always going to get funded, but at least we've got an avenue there now to bring those needs for early learning, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Donalda. I mean, I think we have, we're in this place of a moment in which early childhood is a primary focus, and there's a lot of support from our governor, advocates, legislators, and so I feel like it's really an exciting time for us to really think about what the needs are for the children in our early care and education setting.
And the work from the implementation team goes to the OCC office, correct? And then from there would go for the policy. And some of that I would anticipate Miriam will be taking to the cabinet, and information in and information out from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, I think that's why it's important that like Sarah and Alyssa are on, because it's really taking the policy direction of the early learning division, which is all, being connected to the prenatal to 5 years old cabinet, as well as the council strategic planning, and making sure that what is being developed is in line with all of those priorities and policy directions. From and kind of the early learning division is kind of that space where we're, making sure that we're connecting all that.
Mm-hmm. So if people are interested to serve on the implementation committee, do they just let you know, Meredith, or how would that be? Or do they just show up?
That would be great. Just go ahead and email me, and we'll get you on the list and on the email threads. Thank you. So
at this time, it's a once a month commitment. It would be the second Thursday from 9:30 to 12:30, and it's in Monmouth for in-person meetings, but others could be virtual. Correct?
Yes, Correct.
Any other comments? I want to thank the committee. I really do think you've done some really good work. I really think that the value statements, some of the comments about how we're getting to alignment, the stressing the family voice and encouraging that to be a strong component, the connection back and forth with the community, the recognition of the personnel development being based on skills and other abilities as well. Those are really key components that are going forward, as well as how that addressed equity all along. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. There is another note in the chat box from Robin Lopez Melton at the Research Institute, and she says, I've appreciated all of the time, commitment, and thoughtfulness that this committee has provided in the revision process. Thank you from all of us here at TRI. Thank you, Robin.
And now maybe it won't be at arm's length, it will be within the circle. Anybody else have anything more to add? We don't want to just stay on the line because we've got the line. Dawn, any more comments?
No, I mean, I just echo what you shared of thanking the committee and look forward to this exciting time that I think we're in early childhood.
Yes, and look at the opportunity for the implementation committee to be expanded. So I think that will be a great asset to the committee and a good avenue to be sure that some of these concepts that this ad hoc committee's had can continue.
Yep.
Well, I don't have anything more. And
All
it's not TV, I don't want to stretch. Anybody else have another comment? Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you at another committee. Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.